It's a bit poetic, isn't it? That the world's most discreet empire was built not on conquests, not on colonies, but on quietness. While other nations screamed their ambitions across continents, Zurich whispered in somehow. The world listened. In the grand theater of financial history, Zurich is an odd performer, understated, emotionless, and perpetually neutral. But neutrality, as we'll see, was never about moral purity. It was an art form, one that turned silence into gold and discretion into power. The story begins in the shadows of Europe's chaos, when kings were losing crowns, currencies were collapsing, and empires were bleeding themselves dry. The Swiss, those mountain dwellers, seemed disinterested in everything except keeping their ledgers clean. No navy, no empire, no grand vision of destiny, just a peculiar obsession with balance, financial, political, and emotional. And so, while London built an empire on trade, and Amsterdam rode the waves of speculation, Zurich found its niche in something less tangible. Trust. Trust is a word so overused today, yet it's profoundly misunderstood in financial history. Trust isn't about honesty, it's about predictability. And in a Europe addicted to betrayal, Zurich's refusal to pick a side was the ultimate display of reliability. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Swiss watched the continent burn and took notes. They learned that power is temporary, but discretion endures. When gold flowed from one collapsing empire to another, Zurich offered shelter not out of generosity, but out of practicality. They didn't care who won the war. They only cared that the deposits arrived on time. By the late 19th century, as industrialization rewrote the rules of money, Zurich had perfected its paradox, being both invisible and indispensable. Its financial institutions, Julius Baer, Credit Suisse, UBS, grew, not through expansion, but through reputation. A banker in Zurich didn't need to sell. He needed only to keep quiet long enough for others to trust his silence. The world's elite monarchs, exiles, arms dealers, reformers began to sense something sacred in that silence. They saw it as moral neutrality, when in fact, it was strategic ambiguity. Zurich became the vote for the morally ambiguous, the morally bankrupt, and the morally terrified. Because in a world obsessed with winning, there was something strangely comforting about a city that refused to play the game at all. It's easy to romanticize Switzerland's neutrality, the picturesque Alps, the ticking precision of its watches, the image of calm beyond Europe's storms. But neutrality was never innocence. It was a calculated insulation from chaos, a policy born not from pacifism, but from pragmatism. If your wealth depends on the world's uncertainty, what better strategy than to appear untouched by it? And so, Zurich's identity became inseparable from its financial stoicism. When others built monuments of empire, Zurich built vaults. When others drafted constitutions, Zurich drafted confidentiality agreements. In the chronicles of financial history, few cities managed to monetize modesty so effectively. Of course, neutrality came with its own ironies. The same banks that refused to engage in politics ended up shaping global politics through their clients. The same city that claimed to have no army became the safe house for generals, kings, and corporations fleeing defeat. The Swiss franc, that unassuming currency carili, became a global sanctuary, not because it was powerful, but because it was predictable. Zurich's neutrality became an export, and like any valuable export, it was cultivated with care. Swiss law protected financial secrecy not out of moral concern, but as a national asset. Secrecy became infrastructure as essential as bridges or trains. As the 20th century dawned, Zurich's true genius revealed itself. It had turned the absence of ambition into a financial strategy. While Wall Street danced with risk and London flirted with speculation, Zurich sat back, hands folded, counting quietly. The world mocked the Swiss for their caution until every bubble burst, and every crisis found its way back to the Alps. When trust evaporated elsewhere, Zurich sold it at a premium. The neutrality myth, therefore, wasn't amassed over virtue. It was the machinery of survival. When wars ended, Zurich didn't rebuild, it merely When currencies collapsed, Zurich's vaults remained untouched, heavy with the spoils of instability. And that is the cruel elegance of its story. Zurich did not need to chase wealth. The world's fear brought it there. There's something disturbingly human in that, because in every century, fear of loss has been a greater motivator than hope of gain. Zurich, unlike the rest of the world, understood that early. They built a system not around profit, but around protection, a fortress for anxiety, disguised as a haven for wealth. In financial history, that's what separates traders from bankers and bankers from guardians. Yet the irony remains. Zurich's so-called neutrality was, in truth, its most aggressive weapon. By refusing to fight for anything, it made everyone else dependent on its stability. It became the place where kings hid their ransom, where dictators stored their regrets, and where democracies kept their savings just in case. The myth of neutrality, therefore, is not a tale of peace. It is the story of a calculated stillness, a moral pause amid centuries of chaos, and that stillness, paradoxically, become emotion. The quiet tick of Zurich's clocks echoed louder than the cannons of empires. The silence of its vaults outlasted revolutions, and in that silence, a new kind of empire was born, one that ruled not by decree, but by discretion. Zurich never asked to lead, but financial history has a sense of irony. Power often belongs to those who seem least interested in it. While Paris dreamt, London speculated, and New York shouted, Zurich listened and profited. In the end, neutrality was not the absence of conflict. It was the mastery of it. It was the understanding that in a world addicted to volatility, the greatest power lies in appearing unshakable. Zurich didn't just survive history's storms. It learned to collect the wreckage and deposit it neatly behind locked steel doors. Trust is the most fragile currency of all. You can't print it, you can't fake it for long, and you certainly can't legislate it into existence. Yet somehow, the city of Zurich managed to institutionalize it. It turned trust into an industry, packaged it behind marble, confidentiality clauses, and impeccable manners. And the world, exhausted by its own deceit, lined up to buy it. But before Zurich became the world's quiet therapist for financial anxiety, it was just a provincial hub, landlocked, cold, and inconveniently honest. Its transformation into the global guardian of wealth didn't happen through conquest. It happened through consistency. While the rest of Europe danced to the erratic rhythm of revolutions, Zurich moved with the precision of a Swiss clock, slow, deliberate, mechanical. To understand Zurich's rise, you have to understand the psychology of the depositor. Money doesn't seek opportunity, it seeks safety. And when safety becomes a luxury, those who can guarantee it wield more power than kings. By the turn of the 20th century, Zurich had mastered the illusion of permanence. Its streets were quiet, its laws were strict, and its bankers were disturbingly polite. No sudden movements, no flamboyance, no appetite for risk. Just the steady heartbeat of capital preservation. And it was this very restraint that seduced the world's most unpredictable players. When monarchies fell, Zurich held their jewelry. When corporations panicked, Zurich froze their panic in numbered accounts. When entire nations crumbled under debt, Zurich remained the last unshaken rock in a sea of fiscal collapse. It didn't matter who the client was, king, crook, or conglomerate. Zurich's promise was universal. Your secrets are safe here, even from history itself. This wasn't about morality. It was about methodology. Swiss banking secrecy, formalized in 1934, was not some romantic gesture toward privacy. It was a business model. The Swiss Federal Banking Act declared that revealing client information was a criminal offense. This act effectively made silence a national commodity, a legal export. Zurich wasn't just hiding money. It was industrializing secrecy. The world, of course, found this irresistible, because where there are secrets, there is power, and nowhere else could power sleep so comfortably. During World War II, Zurich's vaults became a silent refuge for fleeing capital. Gold crossed borders, disguised as neutrality. Bonds found asylum under alpine snow. And while Europe tore itself apart for ideology, Zurich built its fortune on indifference. Its neutrality was no longer just political, it was existential. In a century of total war, Zurich's greatest weapon was its refusal to take aim at anyone. And yet, that refusal came with a moral cost, a cost Zurich has never fully paid. The city's vaults didn't distinguish between victims and victors, resistance funds and fascist loot. Money in Zurich's logic, had no ideology. It merely required management. Historians would later unearth records of Nazi gold, of stolen art of accounts, frozen so tightly that their rightful heirs never saw daylight. But by then, Zurich had already reinvented itself. The scandal only proved its importance. Even moral outrage could not afford to move its deposits elsewhere. After the war, as Europe limped into reconstruction, Zurich emerged untarnished, cleaner, calmer, well. Its banks, shielded by the myth of neutrality, became global institutions of trust. In a Cold War world divided by ideology, Zurich's discretion appealed to both sides. The Americans respected its efficiency. The Soviets admired its secrecy, and thus Zurich perfected its paradox. A city that promised safety to everyone by belonging to no one. Meanwhile, the rest of the financial world played catch-up. New York had ambition, London had legacy, Hong Kong had speed, but Zurich had something rarer. Invisibility. Its power wasn't in what it displayed, but in what it concealed. Its skyline remained modest, its influence immeasurable. The irony of financial history is that Zurich, a city without natural resources or colonial reach, managed to control the world's most valuable commodity. The transformation of Zurich's reputation wasn't spontaneous. It was curated, decade by decade, transaction by transaction. Swiss bankers didn't advertise. They didn't have to. Their silence was the loudest marketing campaign in history. When a client walked into a Zurich bank, they weren't greeted with enthusiasm. They were greeted with reverence. The banker didn't ask why the client was there. He already knew. Fear had brought them. And fear, when managed properly, is highly profitable. The world began to speak of Zurich, not as a city, but as a condition, a state of financial serenity achieved only through detachment. Politicians, oligarchs, and corporations alike understood that Zurich wasn't a place to grow wealth. It was where wealth went to hide, to rest, to forget its sins. The Swiss called it confidentiality. The rest of the world called it laundering. Both were correct. But while moralists debated, Zurich moved on. Its economy became a reflection of the world's insecurity. Every war, every crisis, every collapse sent a ripple of capital into its banks. The more unstable the world became, the more stable Zurich looked. And so, in a tragic twist of logic, Zurich's prosperity depended on everyone else's instability. It had built an empire not on gold, but on the world's collective paranoia. The 1970s brought oil shocks and inflation. Zurich prospered. The 1980s saw debt crises across Latin America. Zurich prospered. The 1990s collapsed into post-Soviet chaos. Zurich prospered again. In every instance, the world's financial suffering became Zurich's silent dividend. Neutrality, it turned out, was a form of quiet opportunism. By the dawn of the 21st century, Zurich no longer needed to prove anything. Its name alone was a password whispered across boardrooms, treaties, and family offices. Yet, beneath that calm surface, a new anxiety began to stir. Globalization had blurred the boundaries of secrecy. Technology had turned anonymity into a myth, and international regulators, armed with transparency laws, began to chip away at Zurich's marble façade. Banking secrecy was under siege not because it failed, but because it worked too well. Money launderers, tax evaders, and kleptocrats had all discovered what monarchs once knew. Zurich's silence was the safest place to speak. And in an age obsessed with accountability, that silence had become dangerous. The question facing Zurich was existential. Could a city built on secrecy survive in an age demanding exposure? The irony was suffocating. The very discretion that had made Zurich untouchable now threatened to isolate it. Global finance was moving toward openness, but Zurich's entire identity rested on closed doors. Still, history suggests that Zurich will adapt. It always has. When empires fell, Zurich adjusted their portfolios. When currencies collapsed, it recalculated. When secrecy laws cracked, it rebranded. Because Zurich's true stability was never about silency, was about resilience. And resilience, as financial history teaches us, is just another word for So, from gold vaults to global trust, Zurich didn't just survive the ages, it transcended them. It became the quiet conscience of capitalism, a mirror reflecting humanity's endless contradiction. Desire for wealth without exposure, power without responsibility, safety without transparency. The irony, of course, is that Zurich's story is not about Switzerland at all. It's about us, our fears, our ambitions, our desperate need to believe that somewhere, somehow, our secrets are safe. And Zurich, ever the listener, simply gave us what we wanted, a place to hide from the noise of our own making. If Zurich's story in its early days was about building trust through stability, the next chapter is about what that trust created. A massive, invisible empire of wealth. By the mid-20th century, Zurich had accomplished something extraordinary. It had turned discretion itself into a financial product. Picture it. Zurich's streets were quiet. Its famous clocks were always on time. Its bankers were unfailingly polite, and its secrets were vast. You wouldn't see towering skyscrapers boasting about financial might, or flashy ads talking about riches. Instead, Zurich offered something far more powerful. The promise that your money could simply vanish from the world's view without ever vanishing from your control. This wasn't some happy accident. It was a deliberate design, an architecture of belief. The cornerstone of Zurich's mystique was the Swiss banking law of 1934. This law essentially made financial confidentiality a part of Switzerland's national identity. It was born out of fear and practicality. Fear of the political chaos consuming Europe, and the practical realization that secrecy could be very, very profitable. The law made it a crime for a banker to reveal client information, putting privacy on the same level as national sovereignty. While other nations were tearing each other apart in war, Zurich built an unbreakable wall around information. The effect was immediate and magnetic. Fortunes poured in, not just from legitimate business people trying to protect their assets from instability, but also from monarchs, industrialists, and sometimes the more morally questionable figures of the 20th century. Zurich, the quiet custodian, didn't ask questions. You see, money gets shy when it grows too large, and Zurich was the perfect hiding place. While cities like London and New York competed to dominate global finance through sheer size, Zurich perfected the art of being invisible. This led to a quiet revolution in banking philosophy. Zurich's approach wasn't about risky speculation or financial conquest. It was about conservation. Swiss bankers developed what you could call a monastic attitude towards money. For them, finance wasn't a loud game played on trading floors. It was a sacred trust, to be guarded in silence. They embraced anonymity with an almost religious devotion. Account numbers took the place of names. Signatures became secret codes. Transactions were structured to leave no trace, except deep within the vaults of Zurich's revered institutions. Think about the contrast. Wall Street thrived on the illusion of transparency, the stock tickers, the screaming headlines, the roaring markets. Zurich, on the other hand, thrived on opacity. Its power came from everything at asterisk, D asterisk, reveal. This created a fascinating paradox that has defined modern finance. The world's most powerful nations depended on Zurich to keep their secrets, even while publicly condemning the very idea of secrecy. Governments would denounce Swiss anonymity in speeches, while quietly holding accounts there themselves. Corporations pushed for tighter global regulations, but funneled profits through their Swiss subsidiaries. Zurich didn't pass moral judgment. It monetized. To truly grasp Zurich's dominance, you have to understand the psychology of wealth. By its very nature, wealth fears exposure, not just from thieves, but from envy, from taxes, from political shifts. Zurich understood this fear better than anyone. Its entire brand was built on a kind of emotional engineering. Clients who walked into those granite-walled banks in Zurich weren't just buying a service. They were seeking psychological security. They were buying the feeling that their fortune existed in a realm beyond the reach of chaos. In Thyssen, Zurich's banks weren't just vaults. They were sanctuaries. Every polished marble corridor seemed to whisper, "You are safe here. You are invisible here." It wasn't about profit margins. It was about controlling perception. The wealthy didn't go to Zurich to make more money. They went there so they could sleep at night. This brilliant insight transformed Zurich from a simple financial hub into a symbolic fortress. It became a moral paradox, where secrecy was a virtue and silence was a service. And then there's Switzerland's famous neutrality. It was both a shield and a sword. Officially, Zurich had no enemies, no grand ambitions, no conflicts. But neutrality is never truly neutral. It's a strategy disguised as modesty. Throughout the turbulent 20th century, from World War II to the Cold War, Zurich's neutrality was the quiet, steady heartbeat that allowed it to prosper. While other capitals were burning, Zurich remained serenely untouched. When empires collapsed, wealth needed a safe place to rest, not a battlefield, but a sanctuary. Zurich provided exactly that. Even in the wake of war crimes, political upheavals, and revolutions, Zurich's banks remained open, clean, and ready for business. Critics would later accuse them of being complicit. Defenders would call it consistency. But to Zurich, it was neither. It was just business. And in Zurich's doctrine, business was above ideology. This disciplined indifference made Zurich indispensable. By the 1960s, almost every major corporation and aristocratic family had a connection to its discrete network. Its neutrality wasn't a moral stance. It was a mathematical one. Behind Zurich's orderly exterior, a hidden network began to grow. This wasn't a web of conspiracies, but of connections. The city's private banks became the quiet channels linking oil barons, the tycoons to government ministers, politicians to offshore trusts. It wasn't corruption. It was coordinatiously unspoken agreement that money prefers silence. Zurich was never the loud orchestra of global capitalism. It was the metronome, keeping a steady, quiet beat. While Wall Street crashed spectacularly in 1929 and again in 2008, Zurich remained eerily calm. It never experienced those massive, explosive booms, and so it never had to suffer the devastating bursts. Stability was its business model. The city's success was built on a single, powerful principle. Power lasts longest when it whispers. By the end of the 20th century, Zurich's image as the neutral banker was both celebrated and feared. Investigations into hidden accounts uncovered fortunes stashed away by dictators, industrialists, and giant multinational corporations. Yet, paradoxically, every scandal only seemed to deepen the myth. It proved just how irresistible Zurich's promise of discretion truly was. The more the world condemned secrecy, the more it seemed to demand it. As we entered the digital age, Zurich faced a new challenge. Transparency was becoming the new buzzword. The global financial system started demanding openness, accountability, and traceability. For Zurich, this was like heresy, and yet, like a true survivor, Zurich adapted. It modernized its compliance systems, signed international tax agreements, and polished its public image. But beneath that clean new surface, the old spirit still lingered, the core belief that privacy isn't a crime, but a form of civilization. Today, Zurich stands as both a relic and a prophet. It's a relic of a world where wealth was whispered about, not flaunted on social media. But it's also a prophet, because in our age of constant data breaches and surveillance, the value of secrecy might just be on the rise again. After all, basic human psychology hasn't changed. People still fear instability. They still fear exposure. And they still fear losing control. And Zurich still offers what it always has: the illusion of permanence in a world defined by volatility. In the grand story of finance, Zurich's true genius wasn't in creating wealth, but in hiding it beautifully. It taught the world that money, much like power, is most secure when it remains unseen. And so, while other financial centers chase the next big headline, Zurich remains what it has always been: the quiet pulse beneath the global economy's chaotic surface, the discreet custodian of our most precious and dangerous obsession: trust. For nearly a century, Zurich built its fortune on silence. It was a fortress of discretion that outlasted wars, depressions, and revolutions. But by the late 20th century, the unthinkable happened. Silence itself became suspicious. In an age obsessed with transparency, Zurich, the city that turned secrecy into an art form, was suddenly cast as the villain in a global drama about wealth, fairness, and accountability. The neutrality that was once celebrated as wisdom was now condemned as complicity. And yet, as history has always shown, Zurich's real power has never been in what it hides, but in how it adapts. This is the story of how a city built on secrecy reinvented itself for an age of total exposure. The first cracks appeared in the 1990s. A series of global scandals drew attention to the role of Swiss banks in harboring dormant assets and illicit funds, especially those linked to World War II. Suddenly, Zurich's pristine image was entangled with the darker threads of financial history. Newspapers screamed of blood money and frozen fortunes. Politicians in Washington and London demanded answers. Zurich, characteristically, did not shout back. It issued calm statements, hired historians, and created commissions. The tone was deliberate, polite, detached, almost superior. The message was clear. We do not panic. We adjust. Behind the closed doors of its elite banking institutions, a total rethink began. The global tide was turning against secrecy. New international treaties and laws like the U.S. FATCA Act marked the beginning of an era where no account could remain truly invisible. It was the end of banking as Zurich had invented it, and the beginning of a new, subtler empire. Zurich's response wasn't surrender, it was reinvention. If the old power was the ability to conceal, the new power became the ability to manage visibility. Zurich's bankers understood that in the digital age, secrecy could no longer be guaranteed, but privacy could still be curated. They shifted their entire rhetoric. It was no longer about hiding your wealth, but protecting your legacy. Their institutions were no longer vaults for shadows, but custodians of intergenerational stability. The same granite buildings remained, the same immaculate suits, the same calm smiles, but the message had evolved from concealment to continuity. Zurich, once the capital of secrecy, rebranded itself as the world's capital of responsible discretion. It wasn't about hiding from governments, but about insulating wealth from volatility, political risk, and moral hysteria. As always, Zurich understood something the rest of the world hadn't yet articulated. Money's deepest desire, to be public or privated, is to be secure. By the early 21st century, Zurich had built something far more complex than numbered accounts. A global infrastructure of trust structures, holding companies, family offices, and private wealth networks. These weren't the shady shell companies you see in movies, but meticulously legal frameworks engineered to preserve wealth across multiple jurisdictions. The secrecy was no longer hidden in the account. It was built into the architecture. Zurich's bankers had evolved into strategists, part psychologists, part lawyer, part historian. They didn't just manage assets, they managed identity. The financial elite were no longer asking, "Where should I keep my money?" but "What should my money mean?" Zurich's answer was both poetic and precise. It should mean continuity. It should mean you will exist beyond the noise of today. While other financial centers chased the adrenaline rush of fintech, Zurich pursued timelessness. Its ethos was never to be fashionable, but to be foundational. Invisible skeleton beneath global capitalism's restless flesh. Still, the 21st century brought a new kind of threat, not a market crash, but a crisis of legitimacy. Transparency had become a moral crusade. Activists, journalists, and governments turned financial secrecy into a symbol of inequality, painting Zurich as the serene face of global injustice. Leaks like the Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, and Swiss leaks only intensified the scrutiny. What was once seen as discretion was now labeled as complicity in tax evasion and corruption. But Zurich was never naive. It knew this was coming. Its institutions had started preemptive reforms years earlier. Tighter compliance, cross-border cooperation, and adopting new standards for information exchange. Yet the real genius of Zurich's survival was psychological. It understood that while the world demanded transparency from others, few truly wanted it for themselves. So, Zurich began to market privacy as a luxury good, a scarce commodity in an age of surveillance capitalism. To own a piece of Zurich's discretion became a new kind of status symbol, the mark of someone powerful enough to remain unobserved. And once again, Zurich won not through defiance, but through transformation. Today, Zurich's financial institutions are no longer defined by their vaults of gold or paper. They are defined by their intellectual capital, the ability to craft bespoke strategies that preserve wealth ethically, legally, and quietly. The modern Zurich banker isn't the secret keeper of old, but the architect of stability in a world addicted to volatility. The city's ethos remains intact, though its language has evolved. The promises once whispered in marble halls are now coded into sustainability reports and compliance manuals. And yet, beneath the polished modernity, something ancient survives. The same calm certainty, the same conviction that trust not technologies, the true foundation of finance. Zurich's skyline may not dominate the imagination like New York's or London's, but its influence runs deeper. It is the city that sets the moral temperature of money, teaching the world how to appear clean, how to remain calm, how to make power look graceful. There's a poetic irony in Zurich's evolution. The very forces that were meant to destroy it, transparency, globalization, democratization, have actually made it stronger. Because in a world where everything is visible, the few places that can still offer a shadow become priceless. Zurich's clients today aren't fleeing justice or taxes. They are fleeing exposure. They're the CEOs weary of public outrage, the dynasties tired of constant scrutiny, the innovators terrified of intellectual theft. Zurich gives them what it has always given them: silence, structure, and survival. The city's greatest export remains trust, not gold. And trust, paradoxically, is built on mystery. This is the ultimate paradox of Zurich's financial history. It thrives on the moral contradictions of capitalism itself. The world condemns what it secretly desires, and Zurich, ever the patient observer, provides it quietly as artificial intelligence, digital currencies, and algorithmic trading redefine finance. Zurich's restraint seems almost archaic yet timeless. While others build new ways to make money, Zurich continues to build the one thing no algorithm can ever replicate: confidence. Its discreet charm, its calm discipline, its refusal to be rushed, these have become radical virtues in an era of manic transparency. Zurich doesn't need to shout to be relevant. It simply endures, as it always has, in elegant silence. And perhaps that is the city's greatest lesson to financial history. That in a world forever chasing the next big thing, the real power belongs not to those who create noise, but to those who can sustain stillness. Have you ever wondered what happens when money loses its meaning? When the numbers on a screen feel hollow and the markets are just buzzing with empty noise? In that moment, one city quietly steps into the spotlight. Not New York with its bravado, not London with its swagger, but Zurich. Zurich, a city that has outlasted empires and revolutions by understanding a fundamental truth. Wealth isn't just a number, it's a belief, and when belief is institutionalized, it becomes trust, the last and most fragile currency in financial history. Every currency devalues, every coin tarnishes. But trust has no denomination, no border, no central bank. You can't print it, and you can't fake it. For centuries, Zurich has built its empire on this simple paradox. The most valuable asset is the one you can't. Its banks weren't just selling secrecy. They were selling the unwavering belief that someone, somewhere, would never betray you. While Wall Street sold dreams and London sold risk, Zurich sold certainty. The certainty that when the world falls apart, when markets crash and governments panic, your fortune won't just disappear. It will remain. Quietly, elegantly, somewhere in Zurich. And that might just be the most seductive financial promise ever made. Not you will get rich, but you will endure. To understand Zurich's power, you have to understand its rhythm. This is a city that measures time in centuries, not stock market quarters. Its architecture whispers permanence. Its river flows with an unhurried dignity. Zurich doesn't chase the future. It lets the future come to it. This philosophy of stillness has shaped its entire approach to finance. While the rest of the world is racing to digitize and gamify wealth, Zurich remains skeptical of speed. It knows that true stability can't be accelerated. It has to be cultivated over time. As one Zurich banker once said, Other cities make money. We make permanence. The real foundation of Zurich's financial history isn't innovation or speculation. It's patience, the rarest virtue in a system built on greed. Trust, much like gold, has to be mined slowly. It demands time, discipline, and an unbroken record of discretion. Zurich has perfected this process, turning it into a quiet art form. Every marble lobby, every hushed conversation, every perfectly measured handshake, they are all rituals designed to reinforce the myth of absolute reliability. This isn't just branding, it's a kind of behavioral architecture. Clients don't just store their money in Zurich, they surrender their anxiety. They trade uncertainty for composure. In doing so, Zurich performs a kind of alchemy, transforming fear, the great destabilizer of markets, into confidence, the invisible engine of capitalism. This is why, even in an age of blockchain and decentralized dreams, Zurich still matters. No algorithm, no digital ledger can whisper reassurance. Quite like a Swiss banker with a 200-year legacy of silence. But here's the great irony. Trust, like faith, relies on a touch of illusion. If you examine it too closely, it can shatter. Zurich knows this. It has built its reputation on a carefully managed opacity, just enough transparency to appear trustworthy, and just enough mystery to remain indispensable. Every compliance reform, every gesture towards global cooperation is a performance, and like any great performance, it hides just as much as it reveals. Let's be honest, the global financial system doesn't run on pure logic. It runs on a shared hallucination. Investors trust the markets, citizens trust their currency, and the wealthy trust Zurich. And Zurich, ever the pragmatist, trusts only one thing: time. Because time is the only institution that never defaults. In the 21st century, as the financial world gets louder, faster, and more chaotic, Zurich's restraint feels almost radical. Its old granite banks now share the skyline with sleek glass towers, but the core philosophy hasn't changed. Control the emotion, and you control the economy. While traders in New York are screaming into screens, Zurich still values the pause, that deliberate silence before a signature is placed, the unhurried nod that finalizes a billion-dollar decision. This isn't nostalgia, it's a survival strategy. In a world addicted to constant exposure, Zurich's refusal to overshare has become its greatest strength. The same restraint that once seemed old-fashioned now feels prophetic, like an antidote to an age of financial madness. If Wall Street is capitalism's frantic heartbeat, Zurich is its steady, enduring pulse. And this brings us to the ultimate irony of Zurich's place in history. The city, once accused of hiding too much, has become the quiet conscience of a system that now hides everything behind a wall of noise and complexity. Zurich doesn't need to shout about ethics. It simply behaves. In the end, its legacy isn't measured in bank vaults or assets under management. It's measured in something far more subtle: the enduring illusion that trust can still exist somewhere in the world. When the next crisis comes, and it always comes, investors will once again flee to Zurich. They won't be seeking high returns, they'll be seeking reliability. And Zurich will welcome them, as it always has, with calm, with precision, and with that faint air of superiority that comes from having seen this exact story play out 100 times before. Perhaps this is Zurich's final gift to financial history. It's not about innovation or secrecy. It's a profound lesson in emotional economics. It teaches us that the true foundation of money isn't metal, or paper, or code. It's belief. The moment we lose belief in our banks, in our markets, in the very idea that value can persist, the entire system collapses into nothing. Zurich has guarded that belief longer and more tenaciously than any other city on earth. And as the rest of the world seems to drown in its own frantic transparency, perhaps it's fitting that one quiet city, nestled between lakes and mountains, continues to prove that civilization's greatest wealth will always be the simple ability to trust.